There's something about a woman walking away from the train station with her head still held high, even when the only thing she hears behind her is laughter, not applause, not a contract, not even a goodbye. Just laughter, sharp, cruel, unforgettable. That's how folks remembered her. Marietta Rosewood, 50 years old. Too soft in the belly, too slow in the hips, too much for the world, they said. She had shown up to audition for the Cowboy Carter traveling show with nothing but her guitar, her songbook, and a voice that had once made her mother weep while shelling peas on a Sunday. But they didn't hear the music. They only saw the dress that clung a little too tight, the way she sat when her knees cracked the sweat on her brow from a morning walk. Next, they said, and just like that, a woman who had waited her whole life for a door to open was laughed right back down the stairs. She was born with a voice like a summer storm, but no one ever taught her where to let it thunder. So she left. Not for fame, not for a second chance, just to disappear where no one would call her too much again. But here's what they didn't see. The man who stood watching quietly from the back of the crowd. A widowed rancher named Silas Bellamy, known more for silence than sympathy. He didn't say a word that day. But 1 week later, a letter arrived at a dusty post station near the Colorado line. Miss Rosewood, if you ever find yourself tired of being unheard, there's a stage here at Bellamy Ranch. It ain't much, but it's yours. S.B. Why would a man like Silas offer his land to a woman the world had mocked? What sorrow lived in his silence, and what kind of stage could be built not of planks and nails, but of dignity, second chances, and the kind of love that doesn't need an audience? The train left that town the next morning. But it wasn't empty. Stay with us. Because what Marietta found out there among the hills wasn't just a place to sing, it was a place to finally belong. What happened next will make you believe again in late-blooming joy and love that doesn't need fixing. The wagon ride out to Silver Bend Ranch was long and cold, the kind of cold that made bones ache deeper than sorrow. Marietta Rosewood rode in silence beside a weathered man who barely spoke except to say, "It's still 10 miles more," every time the horizon fooled her into thinking they'd arrived. When they reached the ranch, the sky had gone the color of tin and frost dusted the fence rails. 3 horses nickered in the distance and chickens scattered as the wagon pulled into the yard. Waiting on the porch was a tall man in a wool coat with one button missing and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Silas Bellamy didn't smile. He didn't speak right away either. He simply watched her get down from the wagon, watched as she dusted off her traveling skirt, tucked her sheet music gently into her satchel, and looked up at the ranch house like she was preparing to ask its permission to stay. "You, Marietta?" "Yes, sir." He nodded once. "Room's ready, supper at 7. We rise early." And that was that. No handshake, no welcome, no mention of the ad he'd placed in the back of the Starlight Western Weekly. She was shown to a room that smelled of cedar and coal ash, a modest bed, a rocking chair, a small mirror cracked in one corner. In the kitchen, she found flour lard and a note in a steady hand, "Biscuits with dinner, please. We feed the hands at sundown," so she rolled up her sleeves and cooked. She listened as the ranch hands came in from the fields, listened to their jokes, their boots scraping the floor. No one made a comment about her size. No one mocked her voice. In fact, no one said much at all. It was quiet here, quiet in a way she hadn't known since childhood. A respectful kind of silence. Like people here understood pain didn't need an audience to be real. Later that evening, as she stepped out onto the porch with a coffee tin in hand, she heard something low, steady, barely a whisper. It was him. Silas in the barn, brushing down a horse and humming a tune she hadn't heard since her mother sang it by the stove in Tennessee. She stood there, heart paused, letting that moment wrap around her like a second skin. Noticed for the first time, maybe she wasn't invisible here. Not strange, not laughed at, just here. For the first 2 weeks, Marietta stayed busy enough that she didn't have to feel much. She mended shirts in the daylight and kneaded dough before the roosters crowed. She hummed gospel under her breath when hanging linens the same way her mama used to do when her daddy went silent during the hard winters. But silence in this place didn't always mean pain. Sometimes it meant space room for breath room to think. And slowly something strange began to grow between her and Silas Bellamy. It started in the smallest things, like how he never told her what to do, only left her gentle notes in clear handwriting. "Soup needs time, it's in the top drawer." Or "Don't bother with laundry tomorrow, frost's coming in." And she never asked about the portrait on the mantel, the one of a woman with high cheekbones and eyes like a distant ocean. The frame was cracked, dusted often. Marietta had seen grief like that. She didn't poke it. Still, the tension between them thickened one night like the winter stew they both sat quietly spooning from tin bowls. "You used to sing," he said. "Just that." "No question mark." She looked up. "I still do sometimes. I heard you in the smokehouse." Her heart kicked like an old mule in her chest. She nodded, cheeks flushed, unsure whether to feel embarrassed or proud. Then a pause. "I liked it." But right as the warmth of that moment bloomed, another presence broke it. The foreman, Lucas Grady, came in from the cold with a smirk too wide for comfort. He made no effort to hide his gaze, slow and leering. "Supper's smellin' fine, Miss Rosewood," he said. Then to Silas, Louder didn't know cooking and singing was part of the deal. A pause. "Or maybe it's a special arrangement." Silas stood slowly, and in the space of a breath, the air dropped 10 degrees. "You watch your mouth, Grady," he said. Low, calm, final. Grady grinned but backed down, muttering something about not meaning any harm. Marietta stood at the sink, trying not to show the way her hands shook. That night, in the quiet of her room, she didn't sing. She stared at the cracked mirror and saw herself again, not as she was to Silas, but as the world had always made her feel, too soft, too wide, too loud when she dared to dream. The music inside her curled up and hid, but something else stirred too. Something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. The beginning of fight. The next morning, the tension still lingered in the corners of the kitchen, like smoke that hadn't cleared. Marietta tied her apron tighter than usual, her motions deliberate, stiff. She kept her eyes down as Silas entered, but he didn't speak. He never did much in the mornings. Still, something about his silence felt heavier now, not cruel, not cold, just uncertain. They worked side by side that day, fixing fencing, feeding the chickens, clearing the path to the barn through wind and snow. But every time Marietta turned to speak, the words got stuck somewhere behind her teeth. She didn't know how to ask. "Did I embarrass you? Did I ruin whatever peace this place had before I brought my voice into it?" And Silas, he didn't know how to say, "I don't want the others looking at you like that. I don't want them talking about you like you're mine unless you want to be." By noon, Lucas Grady was back. He lingered by the well, while Marietta hauled water, arms folded like he had all the time in the world. "I didn't mean nothing by it last night," he said, voice slick. Marietta didn't answer. He leaned in closer. "You're a fine woman. A man'd be lucky to have a warm body like yours in the winter." The bucket slipped from her hands, the splash cold and humiliating. But before Lucas could smirk again, a sharp voice cut through the wind. "Leave her be." Silas stood in the barn doorway, fists clenched at his sides. "She works here. You don't talk to her like that." Lucas raised his hands, feigning innocence, didn't know she was off limits. Silas stepped closer, jaw locked. "She's not a possession, she's a person. Show some respect." And just like that, something shifted, not just in the snow-covered yard, but inside Marietta. No one had spoken up for her like that in years. Not since her mother. Not since before the music died in her. That night over stew and cornbread, Marietta looked up from her plate and asked softly, "Do you want me to stop singing?" Silas met, her eyes startled, then shook his head. "No." A pause. "I want you to sing louder." And though she didn't say it in her chest, behind the old bruises, beneath the weight of past shames, something began to thaw. Something that remembered who she used to be. Snow fell steady that week, blanketing the ranch in a hush so thick even the wind seemed to whisper. But inside Silas Bellamy's barn, something warmer was stirring, one note at a time. It was Silas who opened the door to it, quite literally. He'd spent the afternoon repairing the old hayloft while Marietta tidied the back room. As she dusted off a crooked stool and a warped fiddle, she'd found something in her itch to try. She had always loved things with stories carved into them, old tools, old tunes. Silas, hearing the first notes, tentative, shy, didn't say a word. He didn't even turn around, just listened. And when she stopped, he only murmured, "Don't stop." So she didn't. Day by day, hour by hour, Marietta let herself return to music, not the stage, not the spotlight, but something purer. For the first time in years, she sang for herself. Gospel melodies her mother taught her, slow, aching folk songs she thought she'd forgotten, songs that told the truth not about beauty but about becoming. And Silas, he built a platform, a literal one, behind the barn by the empty grain shed. He said the boards needed replacing, but the truth was, he was building her a stage, not a big one. Just enough room for a woman to stand and let her voice rise into the dusk. You think the cows will be impressed? She teased one night, stepping onto the platform barefoot. I think I will be, Silas answered. Quiet, honest. That was the thing about Silas Bellamy. He didn't flatter. He didn't charm. But every word he gave her felt like a fence post sunk deep in the earth, sturdy, lasting exactly where it needed to be. And one evening, when the sun laid itself soft across the fields, he brought her a carved wooden sign. She read the letters aloud. Marietta's porch. You made this, she asked, blinking back tears. I watched you make everything else, he said. Figured it was time I returned the favor. That night, with just him, the stars, and a shy pair of barn owls for an audience, Marietta Rosewood sang with her whole chest, and the air for once felt light enough to carry her sound. Some wounds don't close with silence. They heal with sound low, steady, and wholly one's own. It happens slowly, like spring snow melting into earth, until wildflowers bloom without asking permission. One morning, Marietta found her reflection in the window pane, as she kneaded bread flour dusted across her knuckles, hair tied back, laugh lines softening her face. She didn't wince at the sight. She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked, and she smiled. Not because she saw something thinner or younger or prettier, but because she saw someone honest, someone who'd stayed when the world told her to shrink or disappear. Someone who'd chosen to sing again, not for crowds, but for her own soul. Out at the porch stage, the animals came first. Then a few hands from the neighboring farms. Then the local widow with kind hands and a harmonica. Then a boy who brought his grandfather's banjo. By the second Sunday of June, the stage was full of fiddles tapping boots and voices rising like a gentle storm over the wheat fields. They called it the Rosewood Gathering. And Marietta O, she stood in the center not as a novelty or a joke or a backup act, but as a woman fully seen. Silas Bellamy never said much, but every time she caught him looking, his eyes said what words never could. You're not too much. You're just enough. You've always been enough. On the night the stars glowed so bright they seemed to hum, she found him alone by the barn, sanding the edge of a rocking chair. You're always building, she said. He shrugged. Something about having a reason to. She sat beside him close enough to feel the steady rhythm of his breath. Thank you, she said quietly, for letting me come here, for not turning me away. He looked at her then, like she was the only thing still shining after a long, rough storm. I didn't let you come, Silas said. You chose to stay. That means more. And just like that, a woman who'd once been told she was too big for any stage stood on land where her voice was welcomed like rain on dust. And the man who once lived only with silence now found his home full of music, of warmth of her, because sometimes love doesn't arrive in thunder. It arrives in a woman singing at dusk and a man quietly carving her name into wood. It began with the flyers. Crude sketches, ugly words, stapled defense posts tacked to trees along the path to the Sunday stage. Fat Lady Rodeo, come see the spectacle. Bellamy's Barn of Misfits. No names were signed, but Marietta didn't need names. She knew Cruelty's handwriting by heart. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was memory clawing its way back. The whispers in the theater seats when she sang. The manager who said, "You got the lungs, girl, but not the look." The ex-lover who once asked her not to wear red because it drew too much attention. Silas found her sitting on the back porch, one of the flyers in her lap, the corners crumpled tight in her fists. His voice was quiet as always. You saw him. She nodded. I thought maybe I was past it. You are, he said. She looked up sharply. Then why does it still feel like it could crush me? Silas sat beside her. Not too close, not too far. He reached down, picked up a small scrap of wood, and began to carve. Not in a rush, just steady, like he was grounding the air between them. They came by yesterday, the ones who did this, he said. 4 of them. Said I ought to shut the stage down. Said it makes the town look foolish gathering to hear a washed-up woman sing. His jaw flexed. I told them to leave. Marietta went still. Did they? They laughed, threatened to come back. He paused. I've seen men like them before, ones who mistake silence for weakness. A long silence stretched between them. Then Marietta whispered, maybe they're right. Maybe I make people uncomfortable just by being seen. Silas looked up from the carving. You make people feel. That's different. She turned away, afraid of the tears gathering. I don't want to be the reason trouble finds this place. You're not. I don't want to be the excuse for someone to hurt you. Silas leaned forward, then his voice low and anchored. You listen to me, Marietta Rosewood. I lived 10 years without a voice in this house. You brought one back. Music, laughter, people. You brought me back. I will not let shame or fear or four cowardly men take that from you or from me. A breeze passed between them, warm with summer, heavy with truth. She touched his arm. I don't want to leave, Silas. He covered her hand with his own. Then don't. That night, they found the porch steps, splashed with paint, red like blood. A broken fiddle lay beside it. Silas cleaned the mess without a word, but in the morning the sign at the front of the ranch had been changed. Rosewood and Bellamy Gathering Place carved in his own hand. Let them come, he thought. Let them see what it means when two people refuse to be shamed into silence. The first to arrive was a girl with freckles and a banjo. She stood shyly near the barn fence, shifting her weight between scuffed boots, eyes darting from the new carved sign to the porch steps. She had no flyer, just a name she'd heard whispered, Rosewood, and a song stuck in her ribs. Then came an older couple from 2 towns over. They brought a picnic basket and a quilt. Said they'd read about the voice that could make a grown man cry. By noon, a dozen had come. By sundown, there were 43. They didn't ask for permission. They just came. Marietta watched from the barn doorway, stunned by the quiet flood of kindness. Some brought instruments. Others brought stories. One woman pressed a note into her hand that simply read, I saw myself in your sorrow, and I heard myself in your song. It was Silas who gently led her to the small stage he'd built under the cottonwood tree. They came for you, he said, not because of what was said about you, but because of what they felt from you. She stood there, heart pounding louder than any drum. But when she closed her eyes, she could still feel his hand, strong, steady, wrapped around hers, the day he said, you make people feel. That's different. So she sang. She sang not to prove herself, but to offer herself. The songs weren't perfect, her voice cracked at the edges, but it was raw, honest, whole. And when she finished, no one clapped right away. They just stood, as if holding their breath had helped them hold something more. When the applause finally rose, it wasn't thunderous. It was warm, familiar, like a long hug after years apart. After the crowd thinned and the sun began its quiet descent, Marietta walked with Silas back to the porch, her voice tired, her spirit not. You built all this, she said softly, nodding toward the gathering place. I just gave it a shape, he said. You gave it a soul. They sat in silence as the sky turned amber. In the hush, Marietta whispered, I was never too fat. I was just too full of something the world didn't understand yet. Silas looked at her not with surprise, but with recognition. Now they do. She leaned her head on his shoulder. And you I knew before they did. A new kind of quiet, settled, then peaceful, rooted. Tomorrow there might be new insults, new storms, new reckonings. But tonight there was just this a woman who had been called too much. A man who had been told he was not enough. And between them, a love that asked for nothing but presence. Sometimes the world tells you you're too much, too big, too late, too soft. But sometimes, if you wait just a little longer, someone will look at you and say, you're just right. Marietta Rosewood had spent a lifetime waiting on someone to see her, not just her voice, not just her weight, not just her age, but her. And when Silas Bellamy held her hand on that quiet porch beneath that starlit sky, he didn't ask her to shrink or change or prove herself. He simply made space, a stage not for performance but for presence, for truth, for rest, for love that doesn't perform. Their story reminds us that even in life's second half, even after rejection, home can still be ahead of us, not just behind. And maybe there's a little Marietta in you too, or maybe a little Silas, waiting to give love a second name. If this story stirred something in you, tell us in the comments. Would you want to see more stories like this? Would you stay for part 2 or a new tale of gentle strength and healing? Subscribe to None, Wild West Saga to keep these stories alive. Share this with someone who still believes in late blooming love. And remember, you're never too much. You're just right for the right heart.